to the Cutting Edge podcast series. My name is Janice Johnston, and I am the Chief Executive of Edge Growth Ventures, which is the fund management business of the Edge Growth Group. Today we have a very interesting conversation on the green economy, and very specifically on innovation and SME roles within that. As a backdrop, the world is striving for sustainability, and the green economy is charting the path towards environmental stewardship, economic resilience, and social inclusion. It is looking to redefine the progress by shifting the focus from mere economic growth to a more holistic approach, which includes the priorities of the planet and all its inhabitants. So this is clearly a big topic, very critical at our current stage. And so we are very fortunate to have two guests with us today to pick up on this discussion. We have Tumi Mphahlele from iGen, which is an energy storage company and a thriving SME in the current environment. And we have Ziyad Cassim, who is with us with the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. Both experts in your field, so no doubt have a lot of insights to share with us today. If you wouldn't mind just giving us a bit of background about yourselves and also about what attracted you to this particular space and the green economy, because no doubt you had a number of options to pursue.
Thank you so much, Janice. Again, my name is Tumi Mphahlele. I'm from iGen. We locally assemble lithium-ion batteries, and obviously in this current environment, our kind of business is fulfilling some need. We are in an environment right now where energy security is at its lowest. Look, in the last few months, maybe not so much. But when we decided to move into this industry, we were drawn by the fact that we could see that in the future, maybe even in the far future, energy security was going to be a key issue. So what we were trying to do, we were trying to fulfill a need in the immediate term, but also the need in the future as well. So at that time, there was a lot of installations that were going up. We support that kind of process in that we provide the energy storage of renewable energy installations. So where you install solar panels, they work great during the day, but at night what do you then do? We provide the energy storage that you can then use when there is no production from your solar panels, for example. So that kind of opportunity we saw even for five years ago when we got into this industry. And that's mostly what's actually drawn to that.
Understood. See?
Great. Thank you, Janice, and thank you for hosting me today on what is one of my favorite topics. So I'm Ziyad Cassim. I'm part of the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, which is a bit of a mouthful, so GEAPP for short. And we are a climate change mitigation funder, a philanthropic funder, and importantly work with a lot of DFIs and MDBs to help fast track the just energy transition. So we're present in 18 markets around the world, but I focus on our work in South Africa, which is primarily thinking about how do you accelerate the just energy transition by accelerating decarbonization, but then importantly also focusing on the job aspect of the green economy to make sure that we're creating as much value in terms of new employment as this transition proceeds. To your question, what drew me to the green economy? So my passion has always been economic development, and I spent a lot of time as a management consultant supporting energy and mining players on strategy topics. And in the last 5 years, decarbonization emerged as a key topic, and then there was a proliferation around ESG aspects of their businesses. And that really sparked my interest on how can I help businesses be more environmentally friendly, but also focus on the social aspects of their business. And I recently then had the opportunity to move away just from the consulting side and be closer to the coalface by supporting directly as a funder, as a Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet.
Brilliant. Now, if we pick up on this definition or term green economy, it's obviously quite broad and used in multiple contexts with slightly different positioning. So I think it might be helpful just for the conversation to sort of align on what your definitions are for the green economy and why is it so important. So maybe I'll start with you, Ziyad, and then we'll have a...
Yeah, so you're right in saying that the term green economy is kind of a buzzword, and it probably means you could probably run a poll and it would mean different things to different people. But at its simplest, it represents, to me, sectors and opportunities that reduce environmental risks. And that can be quite an expansive definition. So when I think about it, there's probably two overarching areas. The one being the circular economy, which basically looks at generating zero waste from value chains in food, in retail, in fashion. And then the other area that's closer to my heart, which is climate change mitigation, which looks at transforming industries to low carbon alternatives, such as renewables, green hydrogen, electric vehicles. Why is it important? I'll talk about the climate change mitigation side. So I think the obvious answer is we face as a globe existential crisis around climate events, especially in Africa. I think somewhere around 40% of Africans are already exposed to one or more climate hazards annually. So we need to mitigate or decarbonize our economies in order to reduce the current and future aspects of climate change. But also why it is important is as the world decarbonizes, so every big corporate, every country in the world has some type of net zero economy that actually affects all economies because the global economy is interlinked. What I mean by that is we produce a lot of fossil fuels and there will be receding demand for that. And then secondly, also as economies decarbonize, there'll be less demand for products that have carbon in the value chains as taxes and tariffs are potentially imposed on carbon. So where the green economy comes in, it poses an alternative for new value pools, for jobs. And the good news is Africa as a continent is strategically placed to thrive on a lot of those green economy industries. So it's fundamental that we materialize those opportunities that the green economy represents and take advantage of those much needed new jobs, value pools to spur economic development.
Very eloquently put. Tumi, for you, the green economy?
Yeah. The green economy for me is cleaner energy, and cleaner meaning that we produce energy, but we produce with a lot less risk. But more importantly is we produce much more because it has an element of accessibility as well, being able to reach more people and bring more people into the energy space, basically just lighting up everyone with a lot less risk. So it's cleaner, and for me that has an aspect of green in that. It's an aspect of growth and new systems and new possibilities as well.
Yeah, and what I'm getting from both of you is that it's effectively a complete shift is required, a different way of thinking, and we're very much at an inflection point in terms of how we actually orientate this next phase of development. And if it's not done in a very intentional way, we're not going to get the type of acceleration and rate of change that's needed in order to deliver on those overarching global goals. So the other element that I've sort of really landed on for me, and I'm sure it's the same for you, is it's not dissimilar to how technology was viewed about sort of 20 years ago, where people were talking about it as the standalone sector, where actually now we're appreciating that technology is a cross-cutting element of all sectors. And my sense is the green economy is at a similar sort of juncture, where it's not necessarily something on its own. It actually has an implication across the board. And therefore we need to integrate it into our thinking in all different areas. And a real sense of connectedness that needs to be brought into the thinking. I'm not sure if that resonates with you, and if you can see where the main areas are that we need to focus on.
Yeah, no, it definitely resonates. It's interesting. When I started looking at green economy or ESG strategies for a lot of corporates, it was very much a standalone topic. And then as time progressed, it basically became most corporates' ESG or green economy strategy became their strategy, because you're trying to look at the green economy is a new source of value, and how do you link value creation while also embedding these environmental and social requirements. And fundamentally, if you any large business today, including SMEs, have a responsibility to their customers, their stakeholders, to ensure that they are decarbonizing their system. So it's not something that you can get away from as a standalone business. And to your earlier point, that it is very similar to other new industries that emerge, like technology, and faces similar constraints around that new industries face around the scarcity and quality of capital, requiring a lot of government regulatory support and skill shortages, etc.
A systemic challenge, basically. And to me, what seems to really be coming through very strongly in this theme is the requirement for innovation. In other words, we can't do what we've always done. It's not going to get us to where we need to go. So we need to think about things in a slightly different way, or radically different way, depending where we are. And SMEs are a great space for innovation. And so perhaps you can chat us through a little bit of your journey in the SME space, including some innovation that led you to your sort of product design and how that's sort of influencing the stakeholder set that you deal with.
Yeah. The one thing that I appreciate about being an SME is the ability to innovate and to move and to maneuver without much barrier. Our biggest barrier would be maybe access to funding for all the things that we want to do. But that means we have to be innovative even then in terms of what we prioritize. In my business, where we locally assemble lithium-ion batteries, focus has been on developing the kind of product that is responsive, where we understand what the customers are actually looking for, and working towards that. But in that process, coming through some barriers, like we almost have to work within the limitations of larger companies that are able to develop components within a battery. So a battery is made up of a number of large components. One of the largest components, or the most significant, is a battery management system. And that battery management system controls what the battery actually does. And so if you are not in control of that piece of equipment, you literally do not have control of what your battery can do and what it does and what you can actually offer to customers. So in the work that we do, half of what we focused on was on developing our own battery management system, where we'll be able to offer the kind of functionality that we think the customers are looking for, or what the customers themselves have told us they're looking for. And so we've had that opportunity not just to innovate a battery management system, but some components that actually go along with that. How the cells are controlled, how they are almost in the most basic term, how they're rejuvenated. For example, how you get them to work as a unit to fulfill and deliver the sizes and the kind of energy that you are designing for. And so a lot of the work that we do on the innovation side is around that, making sure that we try and meet what the market is looking for within the constraints of time and money and skills and all of that.
So you've obviously, had a march on a number of other SMEs, and have had to, shown real resilience and innovation in order to get to where you are. But in your opinion, what could be done to sort of support more SMEs to be able to get onto this path and be successful?
And more could be done on the ecosystem side. There are some gaps in that side. In that, on the one end is one type of ecosystem that's hugely tech, that is looking at apps and developing software and all of that. And then on the other side, there's a lot of work that happens around the hardware side. But there's somewhere in the middle where we need the type of ecosystem that looks at developing the software that actually talks directly to the hardware. Think of how you code for robotics, for example. That kind of space is actually needed even in the energy space, because half of what we do in energy has got a bit in software, and it's got a huge chunk in hardware. So if we could develop those kind of ecosystems, and I'm specifically saying this because we are looking for those kind of skills in the market, and they're not very easy to find, and you almost have to develop that kind of skill within your own small business. Is that kind of challenge. But overall, the ecosystem is one, but also the access to funding as well. A lot of the funding goes into pure IP, pure IP, but some of the innovation is not around the kind of IP that is that you can actually put down and sell and package as as that kind of product. But it is still unique, it is still novel, it still meets some gaps in the market, but you can't have a patent against it. And so a lot of the funding goes into that, because it's actually easier to quantify. You can even tell, you can try and estimate how much you can make from that, because you will have a patent. But somewhere in the middle, there's an opportunity to look at the innovation that does not say, I'm doing this for the first time ever in the world. But it is still novel, it is still unique in many parts, and it still talks to the needs of the economy and the needs of the market.
Well, very interesting in terms of this idea that it is going to require this collaborative approach, very much systemic, which is challenging. It's much more complex than just being able to drive things in a sort of specific direction when you're needing this interplay. And that's where I see an ecosystem builder like GEAPP can play such an important part. So Ziyad, perhaps you can sort of orientate us around what you're seeing in your world of the key ecosystem gaps that you're looking to develop further as a sort of very specific role player in the...
Yeah, and the key word is ecosystem. To take an example from South Africa, what you see is there's a lot of theoretical opportunities, and even when I think about some of the work I did 5 years ago, we were expecting renewables to create a certain number of jobs, but that was contingent on certain things being in place and a certain degree of upstream localization. And we're not necessarily seeing a lot of those value pools move as fast as we thought we were seeing the level of jobs being created. And that fundamentally comes down to the ecosystem. Like, how do you get all this puzzle work together? So again, looking at renewables, what you saw in South Africa 2 years ago is actually there was a decent amount of financing, especially available for utility scale solar. But what might have been missing is the necessary government regulatory support as well as the coordination. Now, in the last 12 months, we've seen massive change with the releasing of licensing requirements, speeding up the transaction time, and all of a sudden you've seen this proliferation of renewables, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was a 350% increase on household solar last year. And that's because now you had the financing available, you have the second piece of the puzzle, which is the government and regulatory support. I think the other thing that does inhibit a lot of green industries, to Tumi's point, is skill shortages. And often people think about it as very much skills in the green economy. It often can be just general business skills, and for example, in the IT space. And then finally, what the other ecosystem piece that we're missing often in South Africa is what I call the last mover disadvantage, where at the end of the day, you're competing in global value pools. So if you take renewable manufacturing as an example, if you don't move fast enough, you are going to have global value pools like China that move faster, and you basically get to a point where you can't compete with import pricing. So you need these four puzzle pieces to work together. And as GEAPP, that's kind of how we approach it. For example, on the financing side, you're trying to look at what are some of the gaps. And like something that we found was that, especially for green industries or green SMEs, while there is financing available, it's not fit for purpose. So because a lot of the industries are new and a certain degree of innovation is needed and you're not sure what the speed of commercialization is needed, something that was clear is like you need financing that can provide a longer tenor than typically is available to SMEs. You also do need some degree of flexibility, like first loss facilities, where you can make a loss initially, and there because you only will catalyze at a certain period. While also another area that's big in GEAPP's focus is the necessary government enablement support. And it's not just about putting support behind regulation. Another area that I'm seeing as really important is coordination. Because when you think about something like renewables just in South Africa, there's probably like 6 ministries I could list who have some stake in listing renewables. So again, as GEAPP, we are trying to get behind industries, especially renewable energy, to make sure that we're filling in all those gaps to catalyze the industry and realize the dream of the jobs that were envisioned 5 or so years ago.
Yes, because I suppose there is also sometimes different consequences to these changes, which sometimes can be sort of at odds with each other. So sometimes the more greener solutions and tech advancements can actually have negative consequences for job creation in some areas. And so the social elements and the environmental objectives don't always go hand in hand, which can add another layer of complexity to how we actually make the right decisions to get the overall societal benefits. How would you sort of grapple with some of those more difficult challenges?
Yeah, it's a tough question. And I think when it comes to especially the job aspect, it is a very contested space in South Africa. And again, what we are seeing theoretically, if you had to go total up the potential jobs in hydrogen, EVs, and renewables, which are like the big 3 green economy industries in South Africa, you'll probably get to like hundreds of thousands of jobs. So those exist. But what we see is you need relative deliberate action and be quite focused on what are the labor intensive parts of the value chain and labor intensive industries. Just to give you an example, an industry like wind, if I'm not mistaken, creates around 2 jobs per $1 million invested. But something like hydrogen creates 20 jobs per $1 million invested. So you actually need to be really targeted from a policymaker point of view of where you're focusing. And then on the value chain aspect, the key area that I sometimes worry for South Africa that we might not get right is the upstream manufacturing side. Because when you think about the jobs that will be lost as economies decarbonize, a lot of those are fossil fuel value chain jobs that are relatively high quality jobs. And the only substitute for that often is going to be in manufacturing, and that also gives you the quantum of jobs. So I think that's an area that we need to focus on. But at the same time, as emerging markets, you can only move at a speed that caters for the economy, the necessary needs like energy security, and also not adversely affecting unemployment, which I think as South Africa we're moving at a relatively good pace on.
Yeah, and I suppose some of that also interplays with the growth in SMEs, which is often the real job creation engine within the economy. So within these policy developments, to give space to the SMEs to be able to access that value chain. Tumi, how have you found that in terms of being able to effectively deliver on what could be seen as quite a CapEx intensive sort of business proposition as an SME, which is normally not where you would expect to find?
Yes, it is quite capital intensive to manufacture, and to speak to Ziyad's point, if we look at the kind of growth that we experienced last year in renewable energy, if we were manufacturing all of those solar panels that we're putting up on the roofs, if we were manufacturing locally all of the batteries that were put up in factories, in houses, we would have so much more. We would be able to show so much more in terms of jobs and how many jobs we've actually created. But we are not doing that because largely we are not able to compete with manufacturing that happens, for example, in China. So we locally assemble, and we are facing a lot more competition with the kind of products that are fully imported from the likes of China, but yet we actually create the jobs. So what we are looking at, though, in terms of dealing with that kind of issue, is to see how much of the manufacturing we can still do in this country, so that we do not end up almost losing all of the manufacturing to China. But that can only come through with the kind of laws and regulations that will protect some of what we can do. So we are in a global kind of environment, so it's very difficult to restrain trade and things like that. But at the same time, is the role of government is also to protect and guide and make sure that while we play globally, we need to still be able to provide for ourselves. And that might mean that there is some intervention in terms of what we can bring in, how much we can bring in, and all of that. So we might not necessarily want to manufacture everything from scratch, but we might want to grow skills that are relatively on the higher level. So we need to be able to develop maybe the software that will go along with the hardware and the commodity that you're actually bringing in. It might be harder for us to compete in terms of making some of these kind of items that are seen as commodities in this current economy. But we need to be able to see where we then fit and slot ourselves in. So we are losing jobs in coal, we are losing jobs in some of these industries, but the substitutes we are not able to manufacture either. So we are actually net losing jobs, and only through some targeted interventions we can actually see how we make it work. And as Ziyad was also saying, we could be the last movers in some of these opportunities, and so we need to find, even in that position that we are in, how do we still reserve or almost push and make us much more competitive. So the idea is to be more competitive than the other, so that those kind of opportunities come to us. The idea is not to go and beg and ask guys to be nice to us because you are Africans. We need to be able to drive the policies right from education to skills development, so that we actually do have the skills. So countries that are winning in some of these spaces, they've actually were deliberate in terms of how they develop the skills and the people in those kind of regions.
And are there some countries that we can learn from, to your point?
Yeah, I think China, we could learn from them. They have managed to close some of the widest gaps in terms of poverty. It hasn't been perfect. You can poke a hole in some of the practices and all of that. But in terms of technology right now, someone was saying in the radio that if you look at all of us, our next vehicles are actually going to come from China. And so it's because they were actually deliberate. So they are not perfect, but there are cases where they went out and say, we are going to win here and we are going to win here. And when they go out, it's almost like a teamwork. They rally around that particular objective. Even if it's a 20 or 30 year span or 40 or 50 year span, they are railing around that. And so we could all learn from that. The fact that it is deliberate and it is coordinated and it is targeted.
Very useful insights. And Ziyad, are you also seeing other learnings from other emerging markets in particular?
Yeah, definitely. So green economy is one buzzword. The other buzzword is just energy transition. And a lot of my work in GEAPP focuses on South Africa, but also coordinating with Indonesia, Vietnam, which are the other countries which are called the GEAPP countries that have been given international funding commitments. And I think we can learn quite a lot from those markets. I think in South Africa, we often, what I see in those markets is they're much faster to get to a project pipeline and a much more targeted approach. Another example, another emerging market is Chile. When you look at the hydrogen value chain, for example, there's only about 5 or 6 countries that are uniquely placed to develop hydrogen. It's like South Africa, Australia, Chile, Morocco, Namibia, probably missing 1 or 2. But Chile and South Africa have very similar economic intrinsics on what they can produce. But Chile took a much more targeted approach in terms of having a clear master plan, government regulation, and now they're moving one step ahead of us in terms of project development. So I think just this focused, targeted approach is what's missing. But at the same time, what I will say is we are doing some things well. As a proud South African, I'm very excited what we've seen over renewables in the last year. That degree of growth, I think, if you had to compare it on a per capita basis, is probably one of the highest in the world. Unfortunately, it required an energy crisis for us to do that. But I think we do have a persistent unemployment crisis, and the green economy offers a pathway to create jobs. So one of the things we need to do is, okay, how do we get that level of focus in job creation in these what is now theoretical opportunities in green economy, and really realize them, having the coordination, having the policy, making sure we're filling the skilling gaps. And that's really what I'd like to see as the next phase of South Africa's development.
And maybe some of it is also about communicating the risk that is literally on the horizon if we don't. I mean, there's obviously the environmental risk that we all know well, but it still can sometimes feel a little bit abstract in our daily lives today. And I mean, a similar one on an economic basis in terms of trade and some of the, as you were mentioning to me, and you know, the products that we produce in terms of that are going to effectively be obsolete in quite a short space of time, given where global trends are going. And somehow we need to internalize that into a much more pressured point today, rather than something that's more on medium term. Because if we don't make the changes now, we're going to be caught short very quickly. I mean, how do you think we can sort of in our own ecosystem create that kind of intentionality and focus?
It's almost eliminating the things that are making us lose focus, and where we are not connected. You know, where we are running scattered. We have to put the goals, and we have to narrow them. It's easier to actually chase 1 or 2 goals and be very intentional about that, and then the rest that actually will actually have to follow. What we are battling with, I think, even in our industries, we are too scattered, and we are almost praying and praying and say, look, somewhere the seed will have to just land in a softer space and actually grow. But in most cases, it's almost lost energy. You know, if we have to identify the kind of effort that will give us the best results in the shortest time, so we can move on to the next. So, but what we are doing is we are almost doing too much, but at a low wavelength, and so we are not moving. That's my view around not just in our country in general, but also in renewable energy itself as well. By this time, I thought we would have made major decisions around what manufacturing in the green energy space should look like. I have participated personally in a number of papers and stakeholder engagements around localization. But we are not seeing, and it's been a while now, we are not seeing the outcomes that we are looking for. But if this kind of problem was given to a different country, they might have already been able to show something. So there's a lot that we could still do. We are just too scattered. That's my biggest observation.
Yeah. If I can just build on that point, I think one of the solutions which will resonate with both of you is just primarily focusing on the SME space, and that's actually where you've seen a lot of growth if you look at the developed world. Because what happens is a lot of products in the green economy are yet to reach commercial maturity. So it's not necessarily that larger corporate or private sector players are picking them up. What you need is SMEs to almost like trial them, try and find new end-use markets. And you put a lot of funding behind that and help SMEs then grow and graduate to larger companies. I think that's one of the easier routes. One of the biggest barrier, though, is unfortunately a lot of the green economy industries are capital intensive. So the one way to solve that is by looking at more creative capital partnerships. So I see that a lot of like things that Edge Growth is very strong on, like the likes of outcome-based funds. We as GEAPP are trying to think of new models, something we call PPPP, so public-private partnerships, and we've tagged on philanthropy on that. But like, for example, we partnered with the World Bank on the decommissioning and repowering of Komati Power Station by almost providing some bridge financing to get that transaction over the line. And I think there's a proliferation of financing available. So I think more creative financing partnerships are important. And that said, there are also other areas of the green economy that aren't necessarily as capital intensive, like energy efficiency, like waste management, that just need the capital available and the flexibility and the timing of the capital that can lead to innovation. I know, like in the Edge Growth portfolio, there's a lot of exciting companies that have gone through that journey and started with like 1 or 2 jobs and graduated to the hundreds of jobs. And I think while there's a lot of regulatory things that need to be fixed and it's difficult and we're dependent on a large number of stakeholders, just doubling down on the SME sector is possibly one of the easier routes to at least get some results in the green economy, especially around job creation.
No, I will certainly agree with that we need to sort of start where we can have an influence while cognizant of the other stakeholders and environment that we're in. I do want to pick up a bit on your idea on different financing models and sort of, the word that's often used in terms of blended finance, which is effectively sort of combining different forms of finance in order to leverage the amount in a sort of intentional way that can lead to greater outcomes than if each participant were to try and do it on an individual basis. The difficulty there sometimes can be obviously the coordination factor and what that actually needs to look like. So have you seen some good examples of this that we can learn from, and what are possibly the key success factors in the SME space that we can sort of play out or try and replicate more broadly?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of discussions in terms of seeing concrete results, especially in South Africa. I think we still have a bit of a way to go. The one example what is clear is there's a lot of financing available. So whether it's from DFIs, MDBs, impact investors, investment banks, there's been a proliferation of finance. And you do need to do a bit more matching, but it's kind of new and novel. I do think in terms of bringing philanthropy in and bringing that flexible capital, that's an important role. And also not just getting stuck at think about philanthropy as providing like technical assistance, but how do you get it to provide first loss capital, outcome-based payments. I think that's really what's needed, that flexibility, especially in the SME space. Beyond that, I think there's a lot of other mechanisms that are specific to the green economy that investors don't necessarily take advantage of. So there's carbon markets, which is something actually South Africa lags on. And I think carbon markets are now somewhere probably like a $800 billion market, when a few years ago that was just a $200 billion market. It's grown massively, and that's an additional revenue stream that can be taken advantage of and something you can be quite creative around, especially when you have carbon sequestration projects. And then the other area just to be aware of, not necessarily a capital instrument, but has a large influence on investing, is the many subsidies and taxes that are available in the market. So, for example, making sure that you're aware of what are the carbon taxes, because that can lead to new models being made available. At the same time, for example, there was a subsidy for renewables in South Africa last year for households and businesses, and that led to a proliferation of renewables. So also using that as an avenue to essentially make the capital stack provide credit enhancements that allow for new businesses to commercialize.
And I think there is an interesting element in terms of what is actually readily available, and if these are actually translating into slightly more concessional funding terms, with the overlay of some impact investing elements of tracking certain metrics and the like. So I suppose that could potentially also do an interesting opportunity for various SMEs that are able to report, monitor, and do sort of M&E exercises in that regard, as there is a lot of sort of movement in that space, and it'll be interesting to see if that does actually translate into lower cost of capital for the SMEs themselves. But just while I think we need to wrap up. Tumi, if there was two things that you could get from whichever stakeholder that's in your sort of universe that could fundamentally change your growth trajectory, what would that be?
It would be skills, availability of skills in a lot of challenges. We know that if we had access to the same skills that other large organizations have access to, we'll be able to solve a lot of our challenges quicker. Experience, we have seen that it actually helps. But what we do as SMEs is we almost are compelled to take on people with lower skills and then train them up, and then make them almost available to bigger companies that can afford to pay them more. So for me, if there was an innovation around how we exchange skills between larger companies and smaller companies, I'm still thinking very deeply around that, because I think it will be a change maker for our kind of a business where you need a mixture of highly skilled people to help you run on tech and also management skills as well. And then you also need other skills at the bottom to actually work, trade skills. So that for me would be our biggest game changer, because it means we can innovate better, we can provide even better service, we can compete even more. That would be the first thing that I would ask from someone who can potentially provide that. And then access to a kind of patient capital, especially for an SME that is much more capital intensive, and we have to think of our plans in the long term. But a lot of funders and that we have come across, and not all of them, a lot of funders that we have come across want to see things happen really, really quickly. But we've been fortunate. We've had funders that are more patient and are willing to work with us through all our challenges. But not all SMEs are that lucky, and we see some of them closing down very, very quickly. And I wish that it was a bit different, because as Ziyad was also saying, economies that are doing well are those that have solid SMEs that are fueling that kind of growth.
And so you had two areas that you think would be significantly game-changing in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think one that sounds relatively simplistic, but as we've had this discussion, it's become more and more apparent, is everything we've discussed here. I think there's a lot of appetite from the different players in the financing, the necessary SMEs, government, to provide the interventions, but it's just fragmented. So I do think the spirit of coordination needs to be uplifted significantly, because it theoretically exists, but what we're trying to do is create new green industries that will lead to thousands of jobs and create massive new value pools, almost like what certain mining value chains look today. And that's going to require a lot of people working together. I think even in the funding space, there's a lot of funders who are just going individually, focusing on one small project, but you kind of need to work together to find that necessary scalability. So that would be the one thing around fragmentation. And the second one would be seeing some of the more commercial funders taking more big bets on the SMEs, because while we try to come up with these industrial development solutions. At the same time, there's probably a lot of I come across a lot of like unique solutions that SMEs are providing around energy efficiency, around waste, that probably can be scaled. But capital is probably not just capital, but the quality of capital. For example, the tenor, the rate that is available is what's probably inhibiting them. So the second one would be just taking a few more big bets on SMEs in this green economy space, because that at least gives us an opportunity to win in certain industries.
Goodness, so many insights there for us to consider and reflect on. I think that the overarching theme is this coordination, sort of cohesive, holistic approach that we're all going to have to take. And so I suppose no matter where we sit within the ecosystem, we're going to have to see how we can connect better, how we can actually inform those decisions. From an edge growth perspective, it's great to see that there's so many opportunities for innovative finance. That's what we love to do, and we love to support SMEs. So it's in our DNA, and we really want to facilitate more of these kind of conversations, such that we can see the sort of broader goal and accelerate progress in that area. Thank you very much for being with us today and for sharing your insights and thoughts on this important topic.